Ah, Noshiro. You're quite the cute one, but I'm not sure if I can use a ring on you or not. You're gonna have to really show me that you...
ときめくというのはこういう感じですね。いつも勘だの直感だのより理性を働かせている分、こんな感情に。気持ちを受け取った以上、それに応えるには確かお食事の支度と非番の日のお付き合い、訓練などの通常業務においてもモチベーションの向上に応じて。ごめんなさい、今少し考え事をしていました。そのまま続けて。
Alright, enough showing how cute she is. Anyway, up next is a light cruiser from the Sakura Empire and one of Shinano's personal aides, IJN Noshiro. This cinnamon roll recently had her rerun with the Swirling Cherry Blossoms event, so if you missed her, you'll just have to wait for the archive to come around. That said, this cinnamon roll's time in the spotlight has arrived, so let's see just how well she stands out among the many light cruisers in the game, and among the few that we have for the Sakura Empire. Will she be able to stand out against them, or will she be left behind by them? Well, let's dive in. Before we get started real quick, here's a fun fact. If you filter by Sakura Empire and light cruisers specifically, there's a good chance that you'll only see Noshiro in that particular filter. Now, if you've done your retrofits, then she does get 3 additional teammates in this particular filter, those being Yubari, Jinsu, and Kinu. Given the nature of how I usually do my reviews, in a way this would force me to go and review based on these particular characters and their retrofits. I will go ahead and say that I'll give the idea of her stat line compared to all SR light cruisers, but for the sake of this particular review, I'll go ahead and directly compare her against Jinsu retrofit, as both Jinsu and Noshiro are designed pretty similarly. Anyway, starting right off, Noshiro starts with a health pool a little bit under 3,000. Now, this does beat Jinsu decently, but overall is on the lower end of the spectrum for all SR light cruisers. While she'll be tankier than Jinsu, she'll struggle to outlast a lot of her light cruiser counterparts across the other factions in the game. Her light armor does give her some decent protection against AP rounds and torpedo-based attacks, but she'll get hurt pretty badly from HE ammo types, so it'll help to have a healer or some sort of damage control for her when engaging enemies with that type of weaponry. Now, I will also say that she does lose to Jinsu in the evasion game, but just barely in this case. However, both of them do beat pretty much about every single light cruiser counterpart in the evasion game. What this means is that while Noshiro will be just as likely to dodge as Jinsu, both of them will have a decent advantage over most of the light cruisers in their particular rarity. Now, Noshiro does beat Jinsu retrofit and anti-air by a decent margin. However, it should be noted that it is still rather low compared to most of her counterparts. That said, I'm sure Isuzu would be happy to help out in that department if absolutely necessary. What? Isuzu's a Sakura Empire ship girl. Why wouldn't I suggest her with Noshiro? I know she's a map drop ship, and that's a bit of a pain to get too. But you know, she's probably a lot easier to get nowadays than you are. And I definitely would know that, because I have to spend most of my time having to exchange 80 medals for you when you come back around on the exchange shop. Let me just put it this way. If you need help with anti-air in this particular case, Isuzu, San Diego, Carriers, any of them are going to do just fine. With that bit out of the way, Noshiro is going to be a bit tankier than Jinsu, and this can definitely help out if she needs to tank damage a little bit. That said, she's still not going to be the best tank to work with, so make sure that you'll have some sort of damage control to account for that. Trust me, she really doesn't deserve to be bullied. Now, onto her offense side of things, Noshiro has a pretty solid firepower that barely loses to Jinsu. That said though, their firepower is considerably stronger than most of the light cruiser SR lineup. This means that she'll do some pretty solid damage with her guns. Now, her torpedo stat is also rather high as well, and really only loses to Jinsu retrofit. This just means that Noshiro will be able to output some considerable torpedo damage with her torpedoes compared to most light cruisers. Now, I will at least say that she does lose to pretty much everybody in the reload game, but the differences in that particular reload stat aren't drastic enough to make a huge difference in the first place. Considering this stat line, Noshiro is going to be doing exceptionally well with her equipment, so putting really solid gear on her will definitely matter. Now, as for her gear, she is a torpedo light cruiser, and as such will gain a preloaded torpedo after her second limit break. As for her main gun efficiency, Noshiro ties Jinsu in her efficiency of 125%, but this is a little bit below average compared to all SR light cruisers. This might allow her counterparts to slightly catch up in terms of gun damage. As for torpedoes though, she sits at 175%, which is a tad bit lower than Jinsu's 180. But at least it's still well above the average for all SR light cruisers. So while her gun may be just as effective as other light cruisers of a rarity, her torpedoes are still going to be pretty devastating compared to all of the others. As for her anti-air gun, Noshiro has an efficiency of 110%. It loses to Jinsu and unfortunately just about everyone as well. Couple that with her anti-air stat, she's not going to be the best at taking down planes. Of course, as I said though, there are ways you can handle this by just bringing in certain ship girls into your fleet. Overall though, she's a somewhat tanky and decent DPS light cruiser in both gun and torpedo. She's not the cream of the crop in these particular aspects, but she does trade a little bit of that damage output for some survivability. At level 120, we do see a pretty balanced increase in her stats across the board. Thankfully, this balanced increase doesn't really change her position in terms of damage output and survival aspects compared to all of the other SR light cruisers. Level 125 also follows a similar effect, albeit much smaller. Nonetheless though, Noshiro's statline is still a rather solid one and will do pretty well in combat. She may struggle a little bit with taking damage, especially from planes, but as I said before, bringing in the right ship girls can mitigate this particular issue. But of course now, the big question is, with a solid stat line like this one, do the skills that Noshiro have boost her power? Or do they ruin her and make her not viable? Noshiro's first skill is Noshiro's Hoarfrost. This skill increases her evasion rate by up to 15% and decreases torpedo damage taken for your vanguard by up to 20%. For those of you who don't know, evasion rate and the evasion stat are two completely different things. Now, both of them are used to determine a ship's chance to dodge an attack. The evasion stat itself is taken against the attacking ship's hit accuracy stat to determine its part of that particular dodge. Evasion rate, however, will directly increase the chance to dodge by the percentage mentioned in the skill. Anyway, this skill decently increases Noshiro's chance to dodge the attacks completely with this skill alone, so while she may lose to Jinsu in terms of her evasion stat, this up to 15% evasion rate buff, that gives her a major edge over Jinsu and really most of the light cruisers in the evasion game. As such, she'll be able to handle incoming attacks way better than most ship girls as a whole. Now, the last bit about decreasing torpedo damage will definitely help your vanguard. This will help especially when dealing with insanely high damage from torpedo-loving Sakura Empire ships in PvE or PvP. Now, it may not have the most impact since light armors aren't really taking much torpedo damage in the first place, but hey, any damage reduction is still welcome. Now, her final skill is Sky Slayer's Edge, which increases the damage she deals to enemy carriers and light carriers by up to 20%. It will also increase its vanguard's torpedo by up to 20% and improve their crit rate by up to 12% as long as the skill is at level 7 or higher. Now, this is a lot of things when you consider it. The damage boost to carriers is extremely nasty, especially if she's using her torpedoes against a heavy carrier. The torpedo boost will also be appreciated by most of the Sakura Empire vanguards, as it's kind of their specialty. Lastly, that crit rate will further boost the damage output for all of them. Now, this skill is an insanely nice support skill that will dramatically increase the damage output of your entire vanguard. This works insanely well with Sakura Empire torpedo fleets, which is kind of why she's a staple in high damage torpedo fleets. While Jinsu does the same thing, Noshiro's buffs aren't limited to light cruisers and destroyers. This can allow people to bring in someone like Ibuki into their fleet and allow her to be subject to all of Noshiro's buffs. Overall, Noshiro is doing a lot of things for her team. A solid support character for her torpedo-loving ship girls with the torpedo and crit buffs, as well as providing the damage reduction for torpedoes. Her evasion rate boost can help her play as a front tank character should your other ship girls that are with her not be as tanky. Lastly, her damage output isn't too bad for both her gun and torpedo, allowing her to contribute decently in the fight as well. She's trying her best, and by God, she does it well. Now the question is, boss or mob vanguard? Well, that depends. A torpedo-heavy team works really well in both, so she can easily contribute to either side's team with just what benefits her kit provides. One important thing to mention here is that you should pay attention to the boss's type. Heavy armor bosses like battleships and heavy carriers are very vulnerable to torpedoes and will suffer drastically with vanguards led by Noshiro. Medium armors will still take a decent amount of damage, but light armors are not going to be hurt as much as you might think. So make sure you pay attention to the enemy type that you're up against when it comes to boss fleets. Outside of that, she'll work really well in mob fleets, especially if you want to go full into preloads with a team similar to my Right from the Start formation. If you're interested, you can watch the video with the iCard showing on the screen on the top right. It is a really fun fleet to work with and definitely worth working on. If you want to, that is. Overall though, she's a really solid ship girl that's worth investing in if you're looking into the sheer power that Sakura Empire torpedo fleets can bring into a fight. With her buffs being non-restrictive, she can work with pretty much anyone. Just keep in mind that gun cruisers don't have torpedoes, so she won't be as effective with them in terms of her buffs. That said, I'm actually kind of curious how these two work together. I'll probably give it a shot in the future. Other than that, she's quite the adorable waifu character for those of you who claim her as your waifu. Oh, and I hope you enjoyed her oath skin. I know I certainly do. And that'll be all for Noshiro. Hope you enjoyed it and that will help you in your future endeavors. Up next is Yorktown, so look forward to her video when it comes out later on. Now, whether you're a regular viewer or patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching and I'll see you all again real soon.